It's a new chapter of the promising future for Lotus.
The special purpose acquisition company it combined with says Lotus, founded in 1948, was the perfect global luxury brand.
Lotus has always stood apart in the automotive world, not because it built the fastest cars, but because it built the lightest ones. A philosophy born from Colin Chapman's obsession with simplicity and purity shaped every car the brand ever made. But in 2026, that identity faces a strange contradiction. A CEO draws a strict line in the sand, declaring that anything above one.
I really enjoy it, because I love cars, I love sports cars. And
Galez has been the CEO of Lotus for only 9 months.
8 tons is no longer acceptable for a sports car. Yet the reality inside Lotus tells a different story. Its most advanced flagship doesn't fit that rule. And suddenly, the question is no longer about engineering. It's about identity, consistency, and whether Lotus is still the brand it claims to be. The statement that shook Lotus. To understand why Feng Qingfeng's statement landed with the force that it did, you have to understand what Lotus is, not as a car company, but as a philosophical position. Most automotive brands sell performance. Lotus has always sold a conviction. The conviction that driving purity, mechanical intimacy, and the direct conversation between driver and road are worth more than raw power, more than digital assistance, more than the kind of brute force that modern engineering can manufacture in almost unlimited quantities. That conviction has a name. It belongs to Colin Chapman, who founded Lotus in 1952. And spent the next 3 decades building cars around a single obsession: weight, specifically the elimination of it. Chapman's philosophy, simplify, then add lightness, was not a slogan.
Chapman had pulled off a major coup. The team would be provided with Renault's successful and powerful V6 engines.
It was an engineering methodology that produced some of the most celebrated cars and racing machines in automotive history. The Lotus 7. The Elan, the Esprit, the Elise. Each one an expression of the same underlying argument, that the most direct path to driving pleasure is not adding power, but removing mass. That philosophy won races. It won Formula One World Championships, 7 of them across the team's history. It produced a brand identity so coherent, so philosophically grounded, that Lotus enthusiasts do not simply buy the cars. They buy the argument. They buy the belief that Chapman was right, and that the rest of the industry, in its relentless pursuit of horsepower and technology, has been wrong for decades. Why does any of this matter when a CEO makes a public statement in 2026? Because Lotus's brand mythology is not separate from its product. It is the product. The lightness is not a feature. It is the entire point. And when the person running the company makes a public declaration about weight standards, he is not making a technical observation. He is invoking the founding philosophy. He is standing in Chapman's shadow and making a promise. That is why the statement Feng Qingfeng made in June 2026 did not simply generate a news cycle. It generated a reckoning, because the moment he declared 1.8 tons, the dividing line between acceptable and mediocre, he was speaking directly to the deepest value of the Lotus brand identity. Every enthusiast, every owner, every dealer, every potential buyer heard those words through the filter of 74 years of Chapman's legacy. And then they looked at the Lotus lineup, and the reckoning began. What does it mean when a brand CEO sets a standard that the brand's own most expensive car cannot meet? It means one of 2 things. Either the CEO does not know his own product range, which raises questions about competence, or he does know and made the statement anyway, which raises questions about intent. Neither answer is comfortable for a brand already navigating the most difficult transition in its modern history. And the transition, it turns out, is the context without which the statement cannot be fully understood. What Feng Qingfeng actually said On June 2, 2026, Lotus CEO Feng Qingfeng stood in front of an audience at a media event in China and made a statement that, within hours,
It was a big moment for China's Lotus technology. The stock is listing.
I'm excited.
had spread across every major automotive outlet on the planet. The context was the teaser reveal of the Type 135, Lotus's upcoming V8 hybrid supercar. The statement was framed as a philosophy. It was received as a declaration. And then, almost immediately, it became something else entirely. Qingfeng declared that Lotus had set a new benchmark for its sports car, weight below 1.8 tons. He stated that any sports car exceeding this weight is mediocre. He went further, arguing that in the era of electrification, high peak power numbers are worthless. Horsepower is easy to obtain, he said. Heavy weight is what degrades handling. Even a 2.0 horsepower car weighing over 1.8 tons is, in his own words, mediocre. At face value, the statement is exactly what Lotus should be saying. The Chapman philosophy, simplify, then add lightness, is the brand's founding argument and its most valuable asset. 1. 8 tons as a hard ceiling sounds like Colin Chapman speaking from 1962. The automotive press initially responded accordingly. Coverage framed it as a principled stand, a CEO willing to publicly challenge the direction the entire industry was moving. Bold, principled, on brand. What made the statement feel credible was the framing. Calling heavyweight sports cars mediocre was a direct rejection of the industry's current direction, where electrification and hybrid systems are pushing flagship models toward 2-ton territory in exchange for 4-figure horsepower. The Lamborghini Revuelto makes 1,001 horsepower. The Ferrari SF90 makes 986. The argument from those manufacturers is that the performance justifies the mass. Lotus's counter-argument, implicit in the CEO's statement, is that weight is a fundamental compromise, one that no amount of horsepower fully resolves. For about 24 hours, that was the story. Then someone checked the Lotus Evija. The Evija is not a peripheral product. It is the centerpiece of everything Lotus claimed it could become. Starting at $2.7 million,
It consumes the air from 0 to 100 kph in less than 3 seconds.
it develops a barely believable 1,972 horsepower from 4 electric motors and will keep going to an electronically limited 217 miles per hour. It was announced in 2019 as the car that would signal Lotus's arrival at the absolute pinnacle of automotive achievement. Proof that the brand was no longer a niche British sports car maker, but a genuine hypercar manufacturer capable of competing with Bugatti, Rimac, and Pininfarina. The Evija first broke cover in July 2019. Most cars would have been facelifted in the time it took Lotus to get it to market, or even replaced altogether. It was revealed in mid-2019 and due to be with its first customers by the end of 2020. The first example only arrived with its owner in January 2024. A 4-year delay, driven by the pandemic and the sheer challenge of getting such a technologically demanding machine to function. That delay cost the brand credibility, momentum, and relevance in the hypercar segment. And through all of it, the Evija remained the car Lotus pointed to when it wanted to demonstrate that it belonged at the top. The battery pack alone weighs 753 kilograms, more than the weight of an original Lotus Elise. The Evija tips the scales at 1,894 kilograms. Feng Qingfeng's mediocre threshold is 1,800 kilograms. The CEO of Lotus publicly called the most expensive, most powerful, most exclusive car the brand has ever produced mediocre, without apparently realizing he had done so. Chinese car enthusiasts quickly surfaced the contradiction. The Evija doesn't pass Qingfeng's own requirements. It weighs 4,175 pounds. The reaction required no additional commentary. It spread because the numbers spoke for themselves. And because the contrast between the stated standard and the actual flagship was too precise, too absurd, and too permanently searchable to disappear. What makes the error more than a PR embarrassment is what it reveals about coherence at the top of the organization. A CEO who sets a public standard for the industry without checking whether his own most significant car meets it is either working without adequate information about his own product range, or is so focused on what Lotus is becoming that what Lotus actually is has already become an afterthought. Neither interpretation gives the enthusiast world a reason to feel confident about what comes next. The comment that exposed Lotus' identity crisis, the initial response to Feng Qingfeng's statement, made publicly on June 2, 2026, at a media event in China, was largely positive. Automotive media covering the Type 135 framed the weight declaration as a principled commitment. A CEO drawing a line in the sand against the industry trend toward heavier, more powerful, more technologically complex performance cars. At face value, it sounded like exactly what Lotus should be saying. What made the statement feel credible was its framing. Calling heavyweight sports cars mediocre was a direct rejection of the industry's current direction, where electrification and hybrid systems are pushing flagship models toward 2-ton territory in exchange for 4-figure horsepower figures. The Lamborghini Revuelto makes 1,001 horsepower. The Ferrari SF90 makes 986. The argument from those manufacturers is that the performance justifies the mass. Lotus's counter-argument, implicit in the CEO's statement, is that weight is a fundamental compromise, one that no amount of horsepower fully resolves. For about 24 hours, that was the story. A bold CEO, invoking Colin Chapman, challenging Maranello and Santagata on philosophical grounds. Then someone checked the Lotus Eviage's curb weight. Chinese car enthusiasts quickly pointed out that the CEO's statement had a bit of self-sabotage to it. The Evija, a $2.3 million hypercar, doesn't pass Qingfeng's own requirements. It weighs 4,175 pounds. That is 207 pounds above the threshold the CEO had just publicly declared the boundary between acceptable and mediocre. Not a rounding error, not close. The most expensive, most powerful, most exclusive car Lotus has ever built, disqualified by its own CEO's words. The statement was made after Lotus revealed a V8-powered plug-in hybrid sports car that managed to stay below 3,968 pounds. But any sports car that couldn't hit that weight target was mediocre, or, depending on the translation, a vegetable car. The problem is that all of the company's other cars are well above that number, and he was in charge of the company during the development of all of them. The social media reaction in China, where the story first went viral, was characterized by exactly the kind of engagement automotive brands dread most. The quote spread rapidly on Chinese social media as every new energy vehicle under the Lotus brand, including the Evija hypercar, weighs way more than the 1.8-ton threshold. Not outrage, not the performative anger of people who were never going to buy the product anyway, but the sharp, analytical humor of enthusiasts who genuinely understand the cars. People who found the statement both genuinely funny and genuinely concerning for exactly that reason. Only the Emira, with a 200-pound curb weight,
the new Lotus Emira, British, mid-engine, track-tuned. It's civilized, but under that sleek body,
lands under Qingfeng's benchmark weight metric. That irony became the defining detail of the coverage. The flagship does not qualify. The entry-level model does. The most expensive car in the range, the one that costs $2.3 million and exists in fewer than 130 units, fails the test. The most accessible car passes it. That inversion says everything about how far the product's strategy drifted from the stated philosophy. Motor One noted that no Lotus product should ever be considered mediocre, but that Feng Qingfeng speaks the truth. That the brand which coined adding Lightness needs to return to that tenet. The consensus across international automotive coverage was consistent. The statement had surfaced a tension the brand had been managing quietly for years. The tension between what Lotus says it is and what its recent products actually represent. That tension did not begin with one statement. It has been building for years, and the CEO's words simply gave it a single, quotable, permanently searchable expression. The problem Lotus created for itself. The context behind Feng Qingfeng's statement is not simply a CEO making a miscalculation in front of a camera. It is a brand standing in the wreckage of a strategy it built with enormous confidence, and trying to explain, without quite saying so, why it is now moving in the opposite direction. Lotus's EV transformation, the Elettra Hyper SUV, the Emea Hyper GT, the Evija Hypercar, was not a timid repositioning. It was a declaration. The brand that Colin Chapman built on the principle of radical lightness would become a global luxury EV company. Geely's financial backing made the ambition credible. The Wuhan factory, built specifically for the Elettra and Emea, made it structural. This was not a product refresh. It was an identity transplant. And then the numbers came in. Lotus delivered just 813 vehicles globally in the first 6 months of 2025, a crushing 43% decline from 4,904 units in the same period the previous year. The Emira sports car bore the brunt, with deliveries collapsing 64% to just 891 units. Even the newer electric offerings struggled, with the Elettra SUV and Emea Saloon seeing combined deliveries fall 21%. Total revenues tumbled 45% year-on-year to £162 million. These are not the fluctuations of a challenging quarter. They are the financial signature of a brand losing its commercial footing on both sides of its product range simultaneously. The damage reached all the way to Norfolk. Lotus cut 550 jobs at its Hethel headquarters, the facility where the brand has built its cars since 1966. Out of a total workforce of around 1,300. Reports emerged that Geely had been looking into shutting down Hethel entirely, with some suggesting production would shift to the US to dodge tariffs. Lotus denied it.
There's been condemnation of President Donald Trump's announcement that he will hit the UK and other European countries with increased trade tariffs.
The UK government stepped in with subsidies. Geely said no such closure was happening. For now. The local MP described the job cuts as a punch in the stomach. The factory that once built the Elise, the Exige, the Evora, the cars that defined what Lotus actually is, was suddenly fighting for its existence. Lotus had originally projected 47,000 deliveries for 2024 when it went public. It managed just 12,065. That is not a miss. That is a fundamental disconnect between the brand's projected commercial reality and the actual appetite for what it was building. The Elettra and Emea, the cars that were supposed to carry Lotus into the future, were not selling the way the strategy required them to sell. The pivot was inevitable. Lotus spent the better part of the last decade insisting its future was fully electric. Now it is building a V8 supercar again. That should tell you almost everything you need to know about where the global performance car market currently stands in 2026. The Focus 2030 strategy, the Type 135 reveal, the Emira facelift extending production beyond its originally planned end date. All of it represents a documented, public acknowledgement that the EV-first direction did not deliver. But here is what makes Feng Qingfeng's weight statement something far more consequential than a simple gaffe. When he declared 8 tons the line between acceptable and mediocre, he was not just teasing a new car. He was implicitly passing judgment on 3 years of his own product strategy. The Elettra weighs over 20,300 kilograms. The Emea over 20,200. Both sit comfortably above the line the CEO just drew in public. He did not build those cars reluctantly or under protest. He built them as the future of the brand. And now he is publicly distancing himself from the philosophy that produced them, apparently without noticing that the Evija, the most expensive car in the range, is caught in exactly the same net. Industry observers put it plainly. The Eletre and Emea just are not desirable vehicles. Even at pre-tariff price points, they have not been selling. The Lotus brand might command some premium, but it is not strong enough to command the premium they were asking. That is not a communication problem. It is a coherence problem. And brands that cannot tell a consistent story about what they believe, that publicly disown the direction they spent hundreds of millions building, do not rebuild trust quickly. If they rebuild it at all, the CEOs bet that could backfire. The question is not whether Lotus will continue to exist as a company. Geely's ownership provides the financial architecture behind the brand. And Lotus spent the better part of the last decade insisting its future was fully electric. Outright collapse is not the near-term risk. The question is whether Lotus can continue to exist.
Here it is, the world's first electric British hypercar.
Fuel the future of Lotus and grow us into a serious automotive player globally.
As a brand, as a coherent identity, that means something specific to the people who care about it. That commands the premium pricing its heritage justifies, and that attracts the kind of passion that has always been the brand's most irreplaceable asset. Brand coherence is not an abstract value. It has direct commercial consequences, and Lotus is already living them. By mid-2025, Lotus was offering 99% financing for 36 months on the Emira, the kind of promotional rate you associate with mass-market sedans, not a brand whose entire identity is built on exclusivity and driver purity. That is not a marketing footnote. That is a distress signal. When a brand that commands a philosophy starts competing on financing terms, the mythology is already under pressure. It gets more specific than that. When the Trump administration announced 25% auto import tariffs,
Donald Trump announces 25% tariffs on auto imports.
Lotus was faced with hiking the already expensive MSRP of the Emira even further, and determined it was unfeasible. The brand announced it was halting imports entirely. The only car in the entire Lotus lineup that meets Feng Qingfeng's own declared standard. The only car the CEO did not inadvertently call mediocre is currently unavailable to buy new in the United States. The irony is almost too complete. A sharp 49% drop in Q2 deliveries in 2025 has reignited difficult questions about whether new models can turn things around. These are not the numbers of a brand with pricing power to spare. These are the numbers of a brand whose commercial footing is softening precisely at the moment its CEO needs maximum credibility to stake on a promise about the future. And the promise is substantial. The Type 135 will arrive in 2028, feature a hybrid V8 powertrain producing in excess of 986 horsepower, and be built in Europe. It could also wear the Esprit badge, not seen on a new Lotus since 2004. CEO Feng Qingfeng himself said, "Lotus was born from the rebellious spirit of Colin Chapman, and that is not lost today." Focus 2030 will reset both the brand and the business, keeping us true to our DNA. The language is exactly right. The question is whether the product 2 years from now will match it. Because here is what a CEO's public statement actually is. It is not advertising, which consumers discount. It is not a press release, which journalists contextualize. It is the person in charge saying, in their own words, what they believe. When that person says something that contradicts the brand's most expensive product, the contradiction does not stay in a news cycle. It enters the permanent record. It becomes the first result of the Google search every potential buyer runs before wiring $2 million for a Lotus. What would genuine recovery require? It would require the Type 135 to be everything Qingfeng implied, not just under the 1.8-ton threshold on paper, but a car that actually drives with the directness and purity that the Chapman legacy demands. The supercar has taken over the Type 135 code name from the cancelled electric sports car and is already being hailed online as a modern-day Esprit, the last Lotus V8 supercar. The expectations being set are not just internal. The enthusiast community has already decided what this car needs to be, and it would require time. Brand mythology, once damaged from the inside, does not rebuild quickly. The enthusiasts who form the core of Lotus's audience are patient when they believe in the direction. They are unforgiving when they feel the brand is performing a philosophy it does not actually hold. The Lotus CEO drew a line. 1.8 tons, mediocre on one side, everything worth building on the other. His own flagship sits on the wrong side of that line. The Type 135 had better be worth every word Feng Ching Feng just staked on it. Because if it is not, Lotus will have spent its most credible remaining asset on a promise it cannot keep. History is watching. The enthusiast community is watching. And the 207 pounds that separate the Avisia from the CEO's own standard are, at this moment, the most consequential 207 pounds in British automotive history. In the end, this is no longer just a debate about kilograms or performance figures, it's about belief. Lotus built its reputation on a single, uncompromising idea, that driving purity matters more than anything else. But when leadership sets a standard that even its own flagship cannot meet, that belief is tested in real time. Is this a necessary evolution for survival in a changing automotive world, or a slow drift from everything Lotus once stood for? The answer will define not just the Type 135, but the future of the entire brand. Because once a philosophy breaks, it is never just repaired. It is rewritten. And Lotus is now standing at that exact turning point.